the labourers in the vineyard. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire labourers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the labourers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. At about 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idly all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the labourers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. So I want to begin my reflections with what might seem at first hearing to be a rather facetious remark, and maybe taking the parable a little bit too literally, that here is a trick, if we can call what the vineyard owner does here a trick that an employer can only play once on their employees. Because on the day following this day, which of the potential workers with any sense at all will be there at dawn waiting to be taken on in the vineyard? It only makes logical sense to wait until later in the day, and you'll still get your full day's wage. That might seem like a facetious comment and to misunderstand the nature of the parable, but I think there might actually be a serious and important point in following that line of thought through. I mean, it could be this parable is one that we want to apply to ourselves and to think, what does this say? How does this expose some of our human weakness and attitudes which can be most unhelpful? And it certainly does that. How often in our human experience does that sense of grudging resentment, that rebellion against generosity and grace and compassion actually spoil our human relationships? We can certainly take some lessons in having a more open-hearted and generous attitude to one another in all kinds of areas of our life, from the political to the social to the individual. But my general principle with parables is that Jesus usually intends them to help us refocus our picture of God. So what does this parable say about God? And to go back to that initial comment, here is a picture of an employer who is coming fresh to a situation, not establishing a principle for doling out justice day on, day out for the future, but a God who comes fresh to the situation. We might ask ourselves if we were to set about the task, and it would be immensely arrogant of us, of course, to do so, but to try to write a job description for God. Maybe a better way to put it would be in our imaginations. If we try to imagine the unimaginable, what does God do all day? What would be our picture? Maybe our picture would be of God as a clerk behind a desk with a very large ledger, keeping a record of all of our comings and goings, keeping a careful account of what his beloved children are doing, so that when the time of reckoning comes, just deserts can be meted out. But this is profoundly not a picture of God whose job is to sit behind a desk with a ledger. This is a picture of a God, if you want to take that analogy and stretch it a little bit, who comes out from behind the desk to meet a new situation with love and compassion and forgiveness and generosity. All those things which, of course, we would understand and interpret as hallmarks of the life to which Jesus calls us, and the life that Jesus himself models, of course, in his own experience. A God who comes out from behind the desk to meet the situation anew, afresh. And God can do that. I think one way to summarize what this parable is all about, and I'm stealing a phrase here from a book by David Cornick, of course, from the United Reformed Church, who wrote a book about Reformed theology, which he called Letting God Be God. We want to sum up our theological heritage. Let God be God. Let God come fresh to the challenges of the world and the life we live, and deploy all of his grace and compassion and love in order to bring us to a new place. And I think that's a much healthier picture of what is God doing all day, not sitting behind a desk, but coming fresh to a new situation. And maybe that has, or no, not maybe, it definitely has real life practical consequences for us in the way we live our lives. If we have a picture of God as sat behind his desk with a ledger, and then we come to ask questions of, well, will forgiveness really work? If we live lives of compassion, will that actually bring us to the place we need to be? If we actually live lives of generosity, will it actually come out in the way we want it to, in a renewed creation, a renewed human existence? If God is sat behind a desk with a ledger, we might well have cause to doubt. But if the picture that Jesus gives us of God, coming out from his desk to meet every situation afresh with compassion and grace, well, yes, forgiveness, compassion, generosity, self-giving love, that indeed will win out. God's purposes will be fulfilled, because God has been God and has come to our situation and our world and brought in new creation.